Oh, there you go. All right, guys. Hi, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. And as I know there were people who wanted to see this later, so totally so happy to be here. This is going to be a really super fun evening. Tonight, this will be an herbalism talk. First and foremost, I will be introducing native medicinal plants of Virginia. That specifically, because there's so many plants, right? I mean, we love plants. I don't think we could ever probably stop. So I'm gonna have to stop after a while. So I'm just gonna give a few plants that are specifically used to be. They used to be either mainstream in America, so a lot of people use them. That's how I define mainstream. It used to be very common and found in many places, and or it is they were plants that were in Virginia, and they were used not just by country doctors, or what we call country doctors, or laymen, or lay people, lay providers, but also medically trained professionals. So plants that used to be used in very large scale medical studies and just kind of fell out of favor. So there are reasons for why they either fell out of popularity for various reasons, and I don't have time to go into all that tonight. However, I will share a few of those plants, some of their stories, introduce their names, where I've seen them, mostly in Goochland County, at a summer camp as a nature specialist for 6 years. And also some of the primary physicians who used them. Okay, so I want to be clear as well that this is a story time, a lesson, a presentation primarily on how herbs work in the body, because it's important to have context when understanding botanical agents as therapies. Herbs are very complex, and they work sometimes by, I hate to say it, but actually I love to say it, intelligent design. Should we give it credit? So, there's definitely some paradoxical ways that plants work. They're not drugs in that way, because they can work in multiple ways, multiple pathways to influence general function rather than forcing function in the body. And so we need context for anything that we put into our bodies. We need stories, we need history. So this is definitely, the word of the night is context. Who used the herbs really matters when we're thinking about herbs for modern day use, but also just in general when we're fitting them into our lifestyles. Herbs are not drugs, again, so they're forcing function. Herbs will influence tone over time. So like kind of when we're thinking about context as it relates to a native gardening group or a native plant admiring group, people like us, when we're nurturing those native niches or ecosystems in our backyards or in our parks or in our properties, herbalism is also like that. It's this the study of relationship, the plants in their environment as they grow, how people interact with their environments, and also the environments of the body, as well as to the land and how it's utilized. So by indigenous groups as well, and how people have specifically passed down the knowledge, used it. And of course, with the indigenous, there's spiritual environments as well, the ritual-based environments that plants were utilized in. So if we hear oh, this plant was used in a sauna, we probably should look a little bit more through the research lens of what exactly that would have entailed. It probably would have been a very planned out ceremonial type of structure regarding that plant, regarding that healing, some level of shamanism. So it's important to and it's really the fun part for me, is finding through history and through ethnobotanical research how all those pieces come together to create the larger plant story. Okay, so not one last thing I want to give about herbalism, because again, providing context is really what I'm all about. So to help integrate this conversation for you folks, not all herbalists, but most of us do believe that there is a certain vitalism involved in plant work, that there is a level of there's a component of energy work or spirituality or a creator intelligence in the plant material therapies, which is a huge difference between that and other forms of therapeutics. So though I'm a huge fan of integrative care and integrative medicine, meaning a bridge between conventional modern pharmacology and traditional herbalism, we're not going to look at that exactly tonight, though that is a valid conversation that is very wonderful, including herbal therapies that will actually help enhance the benefits of modern drugs. We are just focusing on herbalism, which is its own huge, massive platform of herbal knowledge passed down and very refined systems of assessment. So how do we look at the body is very unique, and these are methods that have been passed down for since ancient times. So again, this is an herbalism talk, but I want to make sure that I draw it into one that you guys are probably more familiar with, and that is, how does herbalism and how do native plant groups, where are we kind of meeting in the middle here, and what are things that we can all generally agree are good things to keep working on together? Where do we find, where are places that we work on that are the same? So this is a very interesting study in regards to what is going on in the world right now with plant conservation efforts. Herbalists very, very much care again about vitalism, the idea that plant has energy, the plant world is valuable, right? We believe in this value and we care about this value within our work. So we kind of are on the same page there with native plant groups, right? We have that desire to respect nature and to respect ecosystems, be aware of invasive plants, be aware of restoration of native plant populations, but also to solve that really actually, as you see, a clinical issue now, a clinically studied issue with younger generations, especially, of not having built-in value systems and not being able to actually determine different individuals in nature, right? That is a clinical problem called plant blindness. And plant blindness, it means like every plant's the same, right? Every plant's the same. Excuse me while I hydrate. So, moving on to my papers too. All right, making sure I'm on track here. So, yes. So, we believe that in herbalism, a lot of herbalists, not all herbalists. I'm sure there's some very like cold scientific herbalists out there. I haven't met a few, but I'm sure they exist, probably up in Maryland, but I'm not going to go specific on that. Where like, data is everything, just cold data. It's not emphasized as much about vitalism and the idea that like, if you work with a plant in its essence versus like a plant that's sat on a shelf for years and years, right? That's what I'm talking about. And, the idea that plants as therapeutic agents are on this other level besides just how it works on the physical level, okay? So it's okay to it's not in the service of our culture to generalize herbalism, as it's literally an ancient practice with a lot of nuance. So it should be protected, right? And just like we are protecting native plants, part of that native plant teaching is the actual way of therapeutics, that the therapeutics and the storytelling of therapeutics with plants is actually a language, and it should be preserved just as much as the native, indigenous languages or the actual plant conservation itself. That in the essence of native plant conservation is the story of how people have utilized plants for generations. It's in the interest of herbalism to protect these beautiful, beautiful plants. Herbalism is part of the solution towards greater sustainability here in Virginia. I work with people on different various steps, and creating that garden and that supply line is one of the benchmarks, because we have to be able to sustainably bring it, and take care of these plant populations and be active stewards. So I had the great privilege of being asked to join the Chickahominy Eastern Eastern Division for Earth Day. It was like, I mean, just like today and just a few weeks ago. I mean, this has been like an amazing spring and summer for me, for herbal, for my work. I mean, just so much work coalescing and so many great opportunities to meet some just fabulous people. It was a fantastic intergenerational group. So we had children all the way up to seniors on this walk. And this is actually a little bit of kind of like the rundown that I did. Lots of herbalists, we tend to go on walks with people and show off plants and talk about their therapeutic properties. It's just one of the aspects of what we do. And I wanted to specifically invite people into prayer if they wanted to. They actually didn't. But I wanted to at least pay attention to that space. And the purpose of this was to collect information and to offer space in that kind of that terminology we use nowadays for people to express themselves and to actively remember and recall things by walking in the woods with someone who then could collect that information and lead them towards understanding the actual personalities and reducing plant blindness, right? So it was on this walk that we had some amazing moments. We talked about, how we wanted to be stewards in that environment. We actually facilitated some coyote mentoring, which is a wonderful philosophical platform of activities for youth and for adults. It's appropriate for any age to be able to build awareness skills, direction, lead into flow, practice journaling, practice, just different agility, animism, and so we actually found a turtle shell on an Eastern box turtle on this walk, and we saw the trunk of a gigantic American elm, which of course succumbed to the Dutch elm disease, but it was in the epicenter on the way to this little house structure in the middle of the walk, and the walk could have kept going forever, but it was huge. But we just did about an hour or so, and we were at the settlement, and it was the space that people were very interested in actually staying for a while and looking around, and it was of the interest of the chief officer to really kind of talk about invasive plants and what plants were there, which of course there would be plenty of imported plants that did not belong in a settlement. That makes sense around an old house, and what possible alternatives there could be and just how much they loved this space and reclaiming it or bringing it into a new future for them. So really exciting stuff, right? I mean, really super empowering conversation. The kids were journaling, they were having a good time. And that's really the essence of this kind of work. It's just this active storytelling, active engaging with the people who have inheritance to land or have a spiritual connection to land story. And it's in that tapping in through modern dialogue with ancestors that we get into things, right? Sometimes you don't know, this is how I always put it, like you can make the cookies, grandma's recipe of cookies, but when you go home to grandma and she makes it with you, then there's just that little extra something that comes back. That's the kind of work that essentially is really most meaningful to bring this modern conversation and really bring the younger generations in. So native medicinal plants, now we're going to get into it. We're going to get into some of the awesome plant stories, specific plant stories. Again, plants that were very, very incredibly well utilized, well popular, and even used by some very important physicians during American history that are still abundant and native in Virginia. So boneset, Eupatorium perfoliatum, because of the way that the leaves fuse to the stem, also known as agueweed. Agueweed, or an ague, was a fever with intermitting chills. And so it was something that was utilized for this situation that was going on in the early 1800s called breakbone fever. And it also gets its name because it's been indicated for using for bone setting, for actual bone injuries. So it could stimulate a particular activity by the immune system to start repairing bones better. So that is one of its indications passed down through anecdotal conversations, as well as people actually using it and recording it, proving it in homeopathy that, you know, it's one of those things. So very common, swamp, marshy, I believe, lots of wet feet indicator. I intentionally cultivated it in a garden, but I think I've seen it. I think I've seen different variations of it. So the physicians who used it, there was a Charles Mills Fowl, and that was around 1892. And this one was utilized by professional physicians for fevers that were stuck. So that means like a fever that comes and goes over time. It was being talked about, of course, when the situation broke out in 2019 within herbalism research groups. If you guys are okay with it, I'm gonna just pull out a passage of an actual case study, because, you know, we're talking about herbalism, you guys. This is my fun space, and I hope that you're enjoying this ride with me. And I'll give you the sources so that you guys can pick up these books later on too, because they're really good. And, you know, we can't possibly cover everything in one evening, but I think it's good to hear some of these stories. So, I guess. So there was a indigenous healer named Tismel, and he is somebody that the modern contemporary herbalist Matthew Wood studied under, and he's in the Midwest. So there was a woman, and she was given x-rays. She was informed that she had cancer of the lungs. It might be a rare kind of pneumonia. I'm sorry, I can't say that word. One ammonia, sorry. I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. For some reason, it's one of those words I just cannot say. So obviously something with the respiratory, really bad situation with maybe water in the lungs. One little internist chimed in, but the rest of the doctors hushed him down. They left her alone, sobbing in the darkness. "You think they would talk to her when her family was there," was Tismel's comment. Their approach was foreign to his culture. After a while, Tismel's friend chimed in, "Maybe you could do what we Indian people do. We try to think positive. Maybe it is only the rare kind after all." This comforted the woman. After a while, she asked, "Could I have some of that Indian medicine?" Tismel's friend thought it would at least comfort her. Before she could bat an eyelash, the woman grabbed his thermos and downed the entire pot of tea. About 2 hours later, the old woman started to vomit and vomit. The nurses and doctors were on her like flies. Tismel's friend was concerned and called him up, but there was nothing they could do about it. The next day, the doctors took more x-rays and the spots were gone. As Tismel noted, these two women came into the hospital at the same time. In fact, their wheelchairs collided and left at the same time. So that indicated that, and from other physicians at the time, other physicians such as Dr. Frederick Locke in the syllabus of Eclectic Materia Medica, they used it for the relief of cold, measles, asthma, and that cough that is peculiar to older people, and for general muscle aching. So really, really interesting plant with a lot of evidence, clinical evidence, not just from people in the country or, you know, Indian doctors, people who were working on that level. But I think it's very interesting, a very interesting case study, especially Tismel's observations of the entire medical treatment as a whole. One of its relations in the same genus, Eupatorium purpurea, it's in the background, not me. The photo we used for this event. I had other pictures from this year, but I could not access it on my phone of the amazing flower inflorescences of this plant. I mean, they're they're breathtaking. And this is a very interesting plant, also kind of indicator of a swampier terrain, potentially lots of I've read accounts of it growing in peat bogs and boggy situations. It's considered under like the traditional indigenous medicine as a turtle medicine. So because of its ability to kind of draw out gravel from the peat bog that it lived in. So it shows that it's a bit of a mineralizing plant. And we call this idea when we are intuitively looking at how a plant interacts with the environment and how it possibly can work as the body, look like the body. It's called doctrine of signatures. And so this is a plant that traditionally has a framework of use for the kidneys, but also for wasting disorders and situations where a lot has been done on the digestive area of the body, including surgeries that after time, people have to actually either have another surgery because the situation has flared up again. So I know that there's lots of digestive disorders in this country right now. It's a major problem. We have a lot of digestive complaints, more upticks in IBS and Crohn's disease disorders. And so I bring this plant with a lot of case study evidence, a lot of interesting interaction information out there, and it's one that's so common. And the roots were utilized primarily, and of course, no matter what plant is recommended, more context is always needed for like how things are used and stuff. But that's a very interesting plant and a very pleasant one that brings a lot of bumblebees to your yard. Self-heal, Prunella vulgaris. It's in the mint family. And, it's a really interesting inflorescence because it like has this little stack column. And it's an interesting mint because it doesn't really have an aromatic, if any, aromatic smell, which is not as typical of a mint. Most mints are very aromatic with high volatile oil composition. We have one more mint in our grouping here today. But Prunella has traditional uses in skincare as well as throat care. And I wanted to put that out there for something because it's not as widely known, but I definitely have seen it quite a lot on the edges of woods, in shadowy, shady places, as well as open, moist, slopey fields. Elder. How can we leave without us talking about elder? Sambucus canadensis, very, very well-known herb now, still very popular, and really huge legacy in the old world. We call it old world, so Europe or Asia, and now new world, like American, North American. Again, such a complex thing with so many nuanced systems of assessment. But there are some cool indications that I wanted to share. So in American herbalism, the berries came to be used as a blood tonic for anemia. And the great Indian medicine man J.I. Lighthall said to take the flowers in hot tea to produce sweating, but the cold tea would actually do the opposite. So again, paradox, plant parts being utilized different ways and with different methods for different purposes, or with different herbs for different things. So again, like the herbalism taps into kind of an innate intelligence because of these nuances and how the chemistry is expressed. So the elder plant also makes berries, elderberry, if you've heard of those. And I hope that we've all at some point gotten to taste those delicious molassesy tasting berries, which are very popular for, immunity discussions. But elder has a place in a lot of different kind of discussions, including vascular health and blood health. And so the doctrine of signatures with this plant, once the plant turns into berries, they actually look like little capillaries. And that those, so we find elder in a lot of formulas talking about blood and capillary health. I think has the anthocyanins, a really high level of those. Lobelia. I just like want to like jump up and down when I think about lobelia. This plant was elusive for me, even though it was right in front of me. I don't know if you ever have those moments when identifying plants, you're like, is this what it is? And then one day you're like, this is what it is. It has to be. This is, and so Tismal, that Indian healer in the Midwest that Matthew would learn from, he said that lobelia should be planted by people. It wants to be by people so it can listen to people. Okay. So I know that's something, and you might already, this was on the edge of a trail. So people were coming up and down this trail. Groups of kids were coming up and down this trail every day. So I guess he's right, you know. And apparently it's most powerful in the seed pod form. So I recently posted in a reputable herbal research group about lobelia because I'm just so utterly fascinated by its paradoxical and innately intelligent form. Dr. Christopher, who came out of the Thomsonian School, which is where America first learned of the poster child lobelia in the late 1800s, early 1900s. The story is just amazing, but Dr. Christopher said that the plant will actually, when it comes into the body, knows where to go. It'll direct itself to where the action needs to happen. Because of this, it's also known as an accelerator herb. So it's put into a lot of formulas for like compounded herbal tinctures. And, you know, most people wouldn't look at the label. They won't know all the ingredients, but it might be there because it will actually help the entire formula work better. Now, that being said, lobelia by itself, as a single herb, is kind of a rough house. It can cause nausea, and it's actually a form of toxicity in that way. Elder has a similar kind of a bad streak as well. If there's too much of it, or if it's taken raw, and only the berries and the flowers are utilized of elder primarily. I wouldn't venture into anything else without a lot of knowledge in your canon there. But lobelia in itself it shows its toxicity through emesis, or getting an emetic response, a purgative response, so vomiting, okay? But people still use it on purpose to actually counteract a worser alkaloid toxicity. So like some people take some activated charcoal for poisoning, accidental poisoning. The same is used for lobelia to actually empty the stomach of contents after a poisoning, accidental or otherwise. Lobelia, there are, so when I posed this conversation, of course, I got lots of feedback. Some people were like, well, absolutely, it's potentially toxic. Other people were like, no, there's absolutely no clinical evidence of toxicity for anyone from lobelia. So point being, no one has actually gotten deathly ill from lobelia. There's really only records of it being an incredibly useful plant. And there are schools that currently allow and ask their students, if they're learning about lobelia, to take drops up to the point of emetic response of vomiting, just to see how it's variable for each person. So some people can take like 300 drops and nothing happens. Some people can take 4 or 5 drops and they'll feel that response. So I wanted to put that all out there because, again, plants are just so interesting and they work so differently in each and every person. There's so much variance. So we credit lobelia from this doctor named Samuel Thompson, who was very mainstream, like widely known. He put out these health pamphlets. There's actually a really incredible medical paper, several times awarded, on that same database that I found the study on plant blindness. And it's talking about how Dr. Thompson's medical movement actually was a catalyst for mainstream literacy, because all of his plant remedies were numerically coded, and people had to use the numbers for self-determination to help heal themselves, to help their bodies heal themselves, support their innate healing. And it's from that, their initiative to take care of themselves and actively decoding numbers and formulas, that they were becoming literate by, figuring out what was on the package, figuring out how to do this themselves. So a really interesting thing. And of course, there's a lot more to the story, but it was a very powerful time post-Jacksonian America. And lobelia was definitely the poster child of that period. So there's, of course, lots of record. There's lots of anecdotal record, clinical record, studies, lots of people who recovered from serious things. And those things were asthma primarily. It is recorded as being an antispasmodic to break the paroxysm of asthmatic attack. I've personally, in modern day context, spoken to people who've been able to go off of their albuterol inhaler because they did not like the side effects of that medication and take a lobelia tincture dosage instead. Very common Virginia plant. Its very popular alkaloid lobeline is investigated for tobacco cessation products. It's used in its whole form, right? Because in chemistry for modern pharmaceuticals, they're usually taking out one or two chemicals from a single plant. But what we're talking about, of course, is whole plant usage. And the whole plant would be smoked for tobacco cessation as well. The plant also is an acrid bitter. So the indication of a strong lobelia product is upon opening the bottle or putting a drop of the lobelia tincture on your pulse point, you should get a kind of fuzzy, irony feeling in the back, the roof of your mouth. And that would be the same sensation when taking a drop of tincture under the tongue as well. And what it does is to improve the vagal tone. So the vagus has a very strong training of the vagus nerve. And of course, the vagus nerve is incredibly important for digestive and nervous system maintenance, as well as just the entire digestive system from the mouth, the tongue, esophagus, all the way down to the stomach. So it's a plexus strengthening herb. Solar plexus. Partridge berry. Oh my gosh, it's such a great plant. I took out a little piece of this plant and put it into a little terrarium. It did well. I put like a little moss in there as well. Great plant with indigenous roots here in the eastern region, specifically an eastern woodland plant, which of course many of the native plants are in the mountains. But this plant will grow in acidic soils under pine trees on the coast. This was in Goochland County, so and as well as the Piedmont. I've seen it in various places. I've seen it in dense mats underneath beech trees. It seems to like them. It likes shade. And if it's happy, it'll be a really beautiful, dense, understory herbaceous layer plant that could totally just be a different replacement for things like vinca or English ivy, those, or the invasive hops that we see all over pony pasture, right? So it's a great plant to replace with, and the plant has roots in materia medica, or the healing materials for indigenous labor and women midwifery. Okay. The great plant, and it's considered at risk. Wild yam is another eastern woodland, and I just love this plant. I love this plant. It's just so beautiful. It has all of the three leaf arrangements, common leaf arrangements, because there's multiple leaf arrangements. So it has the whorled, and it has the opposite, and it has alternate leaf arrangement. So it's just an astoundingly beautiful plant. And of course, the plant's life is under the ground, and that it can be a massive tuber, like other yams. And it has saponins that resemble steroids. So that's, of course, an amazing potential. And there is a plant that is in the Discorea genus that's Chinese as well, with similar components, which we have come to find. Sometimes there's like a Chinese plant that's in the same genus across the world that has very similar chemistry. We see the same story with American ginseng versus Chinese ginseng too. So it's fascinating. Plant is considered a at-risk medicinal, like partridge berry, meaning they're a bit endangered because of loss of habitat or overutilization, overuse in woodland niche marketplaces for root crops and things like that. But still a very interesting potential. Blueberry. I don't know if you were surprised to see this. I really hope I'm not. I hope people are just still so inspired and excited right now about all these stories. I'm having a great time sharing them with you. Blueberry, humble blueberry. It's of course loves acidic soils, and it's in so many of our woods. And the leaves can be used and have a lot of traditional uses for eye health, as well as potential evidence to support diabetes and blood sugar stabilization. So vascular health as well. So both the Vaccinium genus as well as the so blueberries and bilberries are treated similarly. It's a great beginner plant to forage, to get to know on that level, to write about, to spend time with, to think beyond the berry, right? To think beyond the fruit, and to think about the entire plant as in this totality for its essence and for its contributions to people in place. And I think this is my last one, mountain mint. Mountain mint, I'm not sure of this species, but there's a couple, and this was in Goochland, and there were a few shrubs in various places. Mint family, obviously with the common name, Picanthamum, and there's a few different species that are all native to North America. This one that I'm looking at, this particular species, is the one that was in Goochland County. Highly aromatic, which is in comparison to the self-heal we looked at a little bit earlier. It has no aromatics, but they do share the characteristics that other mints should have, such as opposite leaf arrangement. So up and down the stem they're in pairs, a square stem. This plant has a very strong aromatic smell, and of course then the flower clusters show a labia flower, irregular flowering structure that shapes into a tube of a calyx with a 4-podded seed chamber for the growing ovules. So fun times, a little botany today. Mints are fun though, they really are. And this one is this genus and specifically this species and specifically, I do find a lot in concentration here in Virginia. So not all mints like have a place here, like wild mints, but we do see some bee balms, specifically Monarda. Fistulosa sweetleaf I found in clusters in pony pasture. I wasn't sure if it was cultivated or wild. And I have also found Monarda, the one with the, I think it's Citriodona or something like that. I can't think of the name, sorry. But there's a couple Monardas that are in concentration in this area specifically, as well as across the state. And we do have Monarda didyma towards the mountains with the red flowers. So really lovely, the Monarda genus, and then the mountain mint genus, and then the prunella genus are the mints that I see most commonly. And I might have seen a couple clusters of motherwort as well, native motherwort, which is the Leonoris genus, and the species Leonoris cardiaca, or cardiaca, or is it cardiaceae? But yeah, and then of course there's more. There's always more plants, common names, other plants that have come into my perspective, plants that I've documented, plants I spent time with. There's just such an abundance of plants that are speaking to us and want us to look more into their stories, taste them, spend time with them, and grow and use and to share their stories, because they are quite amazing. Sassafras, anyone? So beautiful, gorgeous grove of really, when you see the trees actually get to mature, right? Really beautiful, not just small shrubs, but gorgeous trees with an incredible flowering stage, and of course the smell of the leaves. I call it the juicy fruit tree, because the leaves smell like juicy fruit gum. Very fruity. All right, so I used a couple cool sources for this tonight, of course. I've gotten to teach this content a couple different times, a couple different ways, and it's always so exciting. So thank you for letting me come here tonight and go back to the old world and the new world books and sources, because they truly are my essence. They are just so interesting in both their historical context, but also in the modern context of talking to people, talking to ancestors, and helping them, engage them, to tap back in and to remind them of their place and remind them of their spaces that were once incredibly ritual based. And really, there's so much information that can be accessed with those types of interviews. So I would be so excited to interview any of you who would be interested if you have Indigenous background or therapeutic background, people in your family who've used plants. That's just a fascinating place to be. I used this wonderful study from Erin Morgan. Really cool little statistic was that even though the herbaceous layer, when the study was done, most of the plants that were found in these areas were herbaceous layer plants, yet almost all of the therapeutics that were cataloged were from trees. So we can, as historians, as people determining the correlations in this data, can be like, well, I think that's potentially because the trees are, there all year round, or maybe it was preference, flavor, just being able to access the trees, who knows? But there's a lot of different things that we can then draw in relationship to learn about people and how they've used things. And then, of course, what's potential if we continue to work to conserve these spaces and these stories for future medicines, because we have a lot of problems coming about. And we know that these plants actually can be helpful in mitigating some of those stressors on the body, but also to maybe potentially increase the efficacy of modern medicines themselves. I also referenced the wonderful book of herbal wisdom, the thoughts, writings, and amazing memory recall of the herbalist Matthew Wood. He was also someone that I directly learned from. And I also referenced United Plant Savers, Compendium Volumes 1 and 2, wonderful nonprofit, focusing specifically on the conservation of Appalachian medicinal plants, and as well as medicinal plants in other areas of the world where their stories are being endangered or not heard, doing particular ethnobotanical surveys. And then I learned from Grandfather Turtle himself. Whenever I do see a turtle, I spend a moment and I thank wisdom for allowing me to talk the plants, because it's honestly a gift. And like that quote I said earlier, it's the turtle, everything you always knew to be true is true. And that is the essence of turtles. So, and the beliefs that we have in this compendium. Yeah, oh, there he is. Good little Eastern box who decided to pop up at my nature hut a few years ago. And then, of course, the children were just, we have a new pet. We want to see him every single day. And he walked away. He left us. I tried, though. I became very close with him. And, very beautiful indicator of a nice wetland, marshy, habitat, forest, I think mesoacidic woodland forest. We had a lot of swamp as well. So a great little precious reminder of how wonderful these creatures are and how they interact with their environments as well. All right, and thank you so much for having me again. If you are interested in this, please don't hesitate to reach out. Laura Baum on Facebook, email laura@laurasbotanicals.com. I would love to hear feedback on how you liked this presentation, or if you have any specific questions moving forward through the content. If you'd like me to, set up a time to do a plant walk on your property, or be interviewed in context to the, history in your family or your space, of course, I would be my privilege and honor to do so. That is the purpose and intention of my work, as well as to help support people's progression through creating their own sustainable herbalism everyday practice, and be able to integrate herbalism into their lives using those benchmarks we talked about earlier, including setting up their own larders, connecting the dots with their plants, to be able to make their own herbal preparations and to actually give back those skill sets and support their communities. I also have a really fabulous book club specific to the topic tonight. It's a book group just about braiding sweetgrass, the wonderful book by Robin Kimmerer. It's an active book group where we actually are talking about it's a platform for Indigenous voices, and a platform to continue the healing discussion, the land healing discussion, using Facebook. So if you're interested in that Facebook link, don't hesitate to reach out and I will send you to the right spot, either the conversation about the interview, the conversation about general questions, the conversation about herbalism, education, and my program, to get you thinking about herbalism every single day, or just getting into that wonderful book club so we can get you some more, get you in touch with a really good book that will connect you into that larger vitalism picture. Although it's written by a trained scientist. So it's a scientist who got more in touch with her indigenous roots and started to remember the difference between just the mechanics of science and the living science, which is one that is a very beautiful source of inspiration to me.
Wow, Laura, that was great. We have a couple questions here in the chat.
Okay, I'd be happy.
I guess Lisa asked, are you aware of anyone using native valerian root, Valeriana passiflora, for medicinal purposes? They say it's been shown to help with sleep problems, and you're wondering if anyone's used it for that purpose.
I have not, and I did not know there was a local native species of valerian. That's great.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance. And I know that, like I mentioned with Monarda, like there's like a Monarda that's local to here. There's a couple variations of plants. And so we, actively are creating like a database. Like I've done that independently where I'm just like marking, because I know with your society, you like have this large distribution map. So like the herbs like that are generally talked about or logged or recorded, they're not always the ones that are in the specific areas of the state, right? So like Monarda fistulosa is like, there's scattering probably around here, but not as much in the West. Valerian, I had no idea about that species. So I'm gonna write that down and look more into it. It's a similar thing with like passiflora. Passiflora, there's Passiflora incarnata, which is everywhere. And I've definitely seen it growing wild here. And there's Passiflora lutea, the little yellow passiflora that's all along the James River. And no one talks about that one. It's only come up in a couple different blogs. I think Stephen Brill, the foraging blog, where he's like, yeah, I potentially would use it the same. And that's the only reference that I've been able to find about people possibly using it as the same for therapeutics. So potentially it's the same. You could get it tested, the root, and see if the active components are similar or on par with the valerian that's officinalis, which is the more recorded, utilized preparation from the old world. It's not native here at all. A really good phytochemist, there's a couple good ones, they're out in the West. Robin Klein in Bozeman, Montana. Really good. That's her thing. Like she could tell you all the chemicals, the chemistry. She could spend an entire, that would be the joy for her, just to talk about chemistry. So I could ask her and I can let you know.
Well, thank you for that. I have one more question, and this one was my question. When you were speaking about lobelia, you mentioned lobelia inflata, and I was wondering if that was the species that had those emetic effects or whatnot. And does cardinalis or syphilitica work in the same vein?
I found one section in the Book of Herbal Wisdom talking about the differences between like the colors, and that would be indicators of differences in uses. But most of the indications, most of the anecdotal herbal research and clinical research is using lobelia inflata.
Thank you for that. Does anybody else have any more questions for Laura?
Yeah, I have a question. Yeah, great talk. Appreciate you joining us, Laura. What is the difference or intersection of the herbalism you're discussing versus what is, like termed homeopathy or homeopathy?
I highly recommend Great question. I highly recommend Matthew Wood's books because he's a trained homeopathy. Like he's trained in homeopathy. That was his background, is a Quaker family in homeopathy. And so that book in particular, he actually talks more about homeopathy and the integration with herbalism. Homeopathy, herbal agents and herbal preparations, you're using the whole herb. In homeopathy, you're using highly diluted forms of the herb. So there's a big difference in the messaging and the carrier of the therapeutics into the body. Homeopathy is taught by proving. So a really meticulous record of how the plants are used. And it's all based on indications that are really fine-tuned and really super specific. So that's a start. Basically, approving was when they would give a homeopathy pellet over and over and over again. It's the same person. And then once the person started showing the symptoms of the thing that they were trying to take it for, that's when they proved it was an effective preparation. And homeopathy, I believe the founder and the school was a man by Hahnemann in the early 1900s, late 1800s. The only homeopathy I've ever taken and given others to take was arnica. And arnica, the plant is Arnica montana, not from Virginia. Pretty sure it's not, it wouldn't be here, the West. You can't take it internally in a whole plant form. It would be toxic. You can, however, take the homeopathy because it's a dilution of that whole plant by like thousands of times. And that is the indication for that is out in Standing Rock, which was the situation that happened in the Black Hills with the indigenous out there, was crushed bone injury, as well as painful swelling and or shock. So after something, the shock. I gave it to someone who suddenly broke their patella in half, you know, because they were in shock. They weren't very happy about it. And I will say that I think it had a calming effect. And it probably made the inflammation go down as well. So really a very popular homeopathic preparation. And there's a few. And that's the way it is with herbs too. There's like a few standbys that get projected and commercialized and become more popular. But even in that, I believe in a full form, like integration into an herbalism lifestyle, growing the plants, getting to know the plants, so that we can actually solve sustainability problems with plant blindness and things like that. That we're not just seeing it as another drug on a store shelf. We're actually involving ourselves in active relationship. So homeopathy can be useful in that way too.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. It looks like Jocelyn said lobelia is great. I love using it when my asthma flares up. Cool, yay, another one. And that's great, thank you. I mean, that's basically what it's like. You hear from people what their experience is like, and then you put it into a category of how many good experiences there's been and how many bad ones there have been. And there's none for lobelia, no bad ones for lobelia, only good for lobelia. And, you know, we have a lot of consensus amongst, because I work with practitioners, I work with doctors, I work with people, and I listen to what their main concerns are with people. And generally it's digestive issues, asthma, allergies, autoimmunity, stress. So herbs can help with every single one of those areas. And a lot of our native plants we can too with our native plants, which are right here and are really special. So I hope if anything tonight, you guys are just walking around more awareness of how incredibly useful these plants have been, and maybe also how they've been speaking to us on like this other level, right? I hope I've inspired you to think about that too, because they are. Did you guys like that lobelia story about Tismal? And he said plants it where people want to be, where they're walking around, because it wants to listen to us. It's like these are words of other people, and I mean, I think that's what's great about historical introspection and retrospection is like we're just kind of like just seeing the words as they are and not interpreting them for any other way, but just to see the words as they are and just to keep record of it. And then it might come to you. A lot of times, and a lot of ways people actually learn plants is through shamanistic retreats, times in the woods by themselves or with a mentor to help them have visions. And that was how a lot of knowledge was passed on as well. And I mean, we're getting back further and further to like, well, how do people originally? And I will have to say that I think that the visioning thing is actually very accurate. If you spend a lot of time in the woods and you don't have your phone and you're not distracted by anything, there's no interference from technology, you really get into a very relaxed state. And I think there's an increase in the parasympathetic nervous system response. I mean, of course, we know with forest bathing, there's a lot of benefits there. Clears the head. And if you're open to it, I think interactions with nature happen on a very beautiful level. So a story that I always like to share is when this one day at the summer camp, I was walking to my nature hut for another day of fun nature hikes with children and with adults as well, young adults. I was feeling kind of like sad and depressed, and I don't usually get that way. I'm a pretty uplifting person, but that day in particular, I was like not feeling really into it. Maybe I just didn't want to get into the day. And I was walking down the hill, and all of a sudden I saw this amazing hummingbird just kind of fly down from the canopy from a tulip poplar into my periphery. And then just like that, it flew off. And I swear, like it just totally took me out of my sad headspace and put me into this moment of joy and wonder. And I mean, as a person, I could have chosen to just like been like, whatever, but I didn't. I had the wisdom and the innate belief that nature was teaching me something. And that is that, miracles are possible and that nature has answers. So I firmly believe that, and that's why I do agree that I think there's a lot of mystery to things, and it's okay to kind of not know the answers. It's not as much about information as it is about experience and wisdom.
I love that so much.
Thank you so much.
I love it too. Thank you so much for having me, you guys. This has been wonderful. And you guys are totally true to my essence. So appreciate it.
Well, Laura, we really appreciate you. And I hope that maybe we might see you in one of these boxes here next month.
Sounds great.
Yeah, we encourage you to join the chapter if you're interested.
Yes, that's great. No, I think I will. That's fabulous. And good for you guys for bringing in all these different various ways of the story, right? Different ways of the discussion. There's so much. It's great.
Yes, ma'am. Well, Jason, I guess he'll get up with you about the recording and later. And I'm going to pause. I'm going to mute. There's less time.